Getting away with murder ain't exactly easy, but if you're trying to get rid of a body, flushing parts down the toilet is probably not the smartest move. That doesn't mean killers haven't done exactly that, though. David Berkowitz, infamously known as the .44 caliber killer, or better known as Son of Sam, terrorized New York City in the mid-1970s. He embarked on a killing spree that left 6 dead, while also toying with authorities by sending letters to the press. In August 1977, he was captured by police. Not a moment too soon, as he was allegedly planning a massacre at a nightclub. Berkowitz had a history of harassing his neighbors, but what tipped the case in the authorities' favor was a report from Cecilia Davis, who had been walking her dog the night of one of the killings. Davis told police that a man walking like a cat had passed her on the street, carrying something under his arm. She heard gunshots a few minutes later.
I didn't know he was a killer. I didn't know he looked nice.
But she also recalled having seen a cop issue a parking ticket to a car in front of a fire hydrant not far from the crime. When authorities checked all the parking violations issued that evening, a car registered to Berkowitz, who lived 25 miles away in Yonkers, came up. Police approached him at his apartment, and he came clean. You know the meme where the old person asks how to work a computer or something like that? Well, that basically caught a long-forgotten serial killer. Wichita, Kansas experienced a horror show from 1974 to 1991. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, tortured and killed 10 people during this time, taunting the authorities through letters, notes, and poems in which he admitted to and detailed his horrific crimes. The crazy thing about BTK is that, as far as anyone knew, he stopped his spree in 1979 with a failed attempt. Rader slipped off the radar, and everyone feared he would become another serial killer whose true identity would never be discovered. He was so far off the radar that his crimes in 1985 to 1991 were not tied to him until, well, he said he committed them. In 2004, 30 years after his first killing, Rader decided he couldn't just fade away into obscurity and resurfaced, sending clues, puzzles, and letters to local media outlets once more. A local Wichita lawyer was writing a book on the case, and there was no way anybody else would tell his story. And it was this need to communicate with authorities and the media in the new digital era that led to his capture. And wanting to communicate with police via floppy disk, Rader asked if it could be traced back to him. Authorities told him not to worry, and then immediately tracked it back to the Christ Lutheran Church, where Rader served as the president of the council.
I need to ask you,
Sure.
how do you like it? How do you like it?
Because I was trying to catch you.
In case you're wondering, the Supreme Court ruled in 1969 that yes, police can lie to you. Rader just wasn't up on his legal knowledge, obviously. Dennis Rader eventually pled guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. There are serial killers, and then there's Dennis Nilsen, the Muswell Hill murderer killed and dismembered 15 men between 1978 and 1983. His go-to disposal method? Cutting up the bodies, burying their limbs in his garden and under the shed, and then burning the rest. But that all changed when he moved into an apartment in 1982. Since he didn't have a garden anymore, he decided the best thing to do was to store the larger limbs in bags that he could throw away later and slice up the rest into smaller pieces, which he flushed down the toilet. Now, if you've ever mistakenly flushed something you shouldn't down the toilet, you can probably guess where this is going. One of the other tenants called a plumber for the clogged drain, and it didn't take too long for said plumber to find human remains.
I have a limited knowledge, but very heavily suspected that it wasn't some animal, shall we say.
Nilsen, continuing on with his brilliant decision-making, then tried to remove the remains himself, but he was caught in the act by a neighbor who called the police. When they arrived at the apartment, they were hit with a stench that comes only from one thing. At this point, Nilsen knew he'd been caught and just pointed the authorities to where he was storing the larger body parts. How many deaths could have been prevented if Arthur Shawcross, the Genesee River killer, had never been paroled to begin with? Shawcross had assaulted and killed 2 young children in the early 70s, but he arranged a plea deal to serve only 25 years. He didn't serve his full sentence, though. A few psychiatrists deemed that he was no longer a threat to society, so he was released after 14. It didn't take too long for the bodies, mostly sex workers and the unhoused, to start piling up after his parole. So how was Shawcross finally captured? In January 1990, New York State troopers performing an aerial search for a missing girl spotted him standing on a bridge next to his car, pleasuring himself as he looked at a body near the river. Not exactly something an innocent passerby would do. Shawcross was ultimately convicted of 11 murders, although some believe that he may have killed many more. Henri Désiré Landru is one of France's most notorious swindlers/serial killers. Between 1915 and 1919, the Bluebeard of Gambé killed at least 10 women and one of their sons. Landru's modus operandi was to scour the Lonely Hearts columns in newspapers. He would invite women to his villa, buying a one-way ticket for them and a round trip for him. If you don't get the nickname, Bluebeard is a French folktale that is basically where Landru probably got the idea the stuff would work. The disappearances, as well as witness testimony that Landru had disposed of large material in a nearby pond, pushed police to investigate him as a person of interest. They found remains of human bones, clothing, identity documents, and banking information belonging to the missing women in Landru's premises. But it was the discovery of a notebook in which Landru kept stringent details about whom he met and at when that did him in. Maybe don't jot down murder details if you hope to get away with murder. According to police, Landru had reached out to over 283 women via the Lonely Hearts ads. They weren't able to track down all of them, though. 72 remained unaccounted for. Whether this means Landru killed them or not, it'll never be known. He remained defiant until the end. Landru was sentenced to death by guillotine in 1922. Before John Wayne Gacy, before Ted Bundy, before David Berkowitz, there was Earl Leonard Nelson. The Gorilla Man, or Dark Strangler, claimed at least 25 victims in an 18-month span across the US and Canada in the 1920s. Nelson made two critical and stupid mistakes in Winnipeg that kickstarted the hunt for him. First, he traded goods that he had stolen from one of his victims at a second-hand store. Right after that, he went next door to the barber shop for a shave and haircut. Unfortunately for Nelson, during his struggle with his last victim, she'd scratched his head and pulled out tufts of hair. When the barber asked about the dried blood on his head, Nelson turned angry. It didn't take long for police to trace the stolen goods to the secondhand store, which in turn led them to the barber shop and the barber's recollection about Nelson. Having matched the description of Nelson from other reports, they went full steam ahead to capture him.
The more you investigate me and the crimes that I am confessing to, you're gonna find that if I wasn't talking about those, you wouldn't have much evidence.
When he was captured, Israel Keyes admitted to killing as many as 8 victims. He led authorities to a few, but the number was never verified since he took his own life before trial. Keyes was meticulous. He admitted to burying kill kits across the country as he planned for future crimes. But when he abducted 18-year-old Samantha Koenig in 2012 from her work, it was caught on surveillance video. Unfortunately, police claimed there was nothing on the tape that could identify the kidnapper. Keyes then used Koenig's phone to send a message to her boyfriend claiming she was going away. A few weeks later, he texted again, this time to say where to find a ransom note. A picture of Koenig and a demand for $30,000 to be deposited in her account were found at a park nearby. And this is where Keyes messed up. Koenig's father deposited $5,000 in her account, which was quickly withdrawn at an ATM. Keyes wore a disguise for the cameras, but police started to monitor the withdrawals as they took place across different cities. Eventually, they received a clear photo of a white vehicle and alerted authorities across the I-10 corridor. A state trooper pulled Keyes over and found Koenig's ID, bank card, and the disguise he used when withdrawing the money. John Christie was responsible for the deaths of at least 8 people, and he might have gotten away with his crimes if he hadn't moved out of his apartment in 1953. That's because Christie left behind a few things he maybe shouldn't have. After he moved, the landlord allowed another tenant to use the kitchen, at which point they discovered 3 bodies stored in hidden cupboards. 2 more bodies were found buried in the garden, and the body of Christie's own wife, Ethel, was found in the floorboards.
The stink is something quite indescribable, and one of the other tenants noticed the appalling smell in the house.
It was pretty obvious Christie was responsible for the murders. He ran, and police embarked on an extensive search. Christie was found 10 days later and arrested. Less than 4 months later, he was executed by hanging. So what's the quickest way to attract attention from law enforcement on the road? Apart from speeding, drifting lanes, or something like that, driving around without a license plate is sure to end with an officer flagging you down, which is how Joel Rifkin was finally caught in 1993. In the early hours of the morning on June 28th, state troopers attempted to stop his pickup because it was missing its rear license plate. Instead of stopping for authorities, though, Rifkin sped away, embarking on a high-speed chase that lasted close to half an hour. Eventually, Rifkin lost control of his truck, crashing it and coming to a standstill.
And he put his hands up like this as I approached. That's when I noticed stench.
At this point, Rifkin was already going to be taken into custody for failing to stop, but authorities discovered something else in the vehicle. A body in the back. When Rifkin was questioned about it, he admitted to that murder, plus another 16. Albert Fish remains one of the most shocking serial killers in history. The Moon Maniac is believed to have killed close to 10 children, and his crimes, some too horrifying to mention here, have become infamous. He was a cannibal and a sadomasochist, and just a generally horrific kind of person. Fish's depravity knew no bounds, but it was his desire to brag that got him caught in the end. In 1934, 6 years after killing 10-year-old Grace Budd, Fish sent a letter to her mother where he described his crimes in graphic detail. The letter was given to police, who used its stationery to track Fish to a boarding house where he confessed. He was eventually sent to the electric chair. On the way, he gave his disturbing last words: "It will be the supreme thrill, the only one I haven't tried." Randy Kraft kept a coded list of more than 60 entries related to suspected victims. Between 1971 and 1983, the scorecard killer mostly targeted hitchhikers, dumping their bodies on the side of the road or freeway off-ramps. He was only convicted for 16 murders, but authorities believe his body count is far higher. He was thought to be the most prolific serial killer in the US at the time. Kraft's capture boiled down to two things: pure luck and even more pure stupidity. In 1983, he was pulled over for suspected drunk driving. Kraft admitted that he'd been drinking but wasn't drunk. Despite his claims, he failed a sobriety test. While that was going on, a second officer came around to the passenger side and noticed a man who seemed to be passed out. He wasn't. The man's genitals were exposed, he was barefoot, and he had been strangled to death. Police also discovered prescription drugs and the infamous coded list in Kraft's vehicle. Kraft currently sits on death row in San Quentin.